Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight we're going to continue our one word series, and I want to look at an ancient prayer called the Shema. Now, this was a prayer the Israelites would say multiple times each day to remind them who God was, who they were called to be, and how they were supposed to live their lives and reflect God's teachings to the world. Many of you have heard this prayer, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might, and love your neighbor as yourself. The Shema is an ancient prayer, but it's vitally important for us to still remember today. It's a call to listen and respond to the truth of who God calls us to be. Because I believe when we align our hearts with God's, we'll naturally care about the things God cares about and fulfill our roles as His partners in bringing out God's kingdom of peace, love, and kindness for the whole world to see. Now, I want to look at the first word of this prayer tonight, the word hear, because in Hebrew, that word is translated to Shema. It's actually where the prayer gets its name. And the word Shema means so much more than to simply hear or let noises enter your ear. You see, the thing about the Hebrew language is it's only about 7,000 to 8,000 words. And when you compare that to the 200,000 words in our English language, the Hebrew word just kind of can't vastly show what they're truly trying to say. So what we sometimes have to do is we have to peel back the layers to look at the different translations, look at the different meanings they hold. And when we do that, it can give us a deeper understanding of what the original biblical writers were trying to convey during that time period. And the word Shema means to truly listen, to pay attention, to focus, to respond, to obey what you heard. Yes, it does mean hear, but it goes so much deeper than that. To Shema something wasn't to simply hear and do nothing, but to Shema something was to hear and put what you learned into action. And the reason this was so important back then is because the Israelites, they learned very differently than us. See, most of them could not read or write. They didn't have Bibles readily available for them that they could page through and study and memorize God's teachings. The only way they learned or heard God's word was through prophets speaking to them, through teachers who had studied the Torah. And so to kind of understand, to memorize, to hold God's teachings close to their heart, they made sure that they remembered to go and act them out, to live them out each and every single day. Because I don't know about you, but when someone says something to me, and I just hear it and I don't do anything, I don't have a way to write it down, I don't have a way to type it or whatever, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. And the Israelites, they didn't want that to happen to them with the Bible, so they made sure that they lived it out and they remembered it. It's why Jesus taught his disciples, right? He didn't just speak to them and tell them a bunch of lectures and ask them to memorize a bunch of verses, right? Every single time that he gave a teaching, he went and then modeled it out to them so that they could see, so that they could hear, so that they could learn how they were appropriately supposed to respond. It's why in the Gospel of John, when John describes Jesus coming to the world, he calls him the Word. Now for us, that's super, super confusing because when we think of words, we think of a book or pages or something that's written down. But for them, the word back then was the teachings. It was what they saw. It was what was modeled to them. It was what they believed in. And so what John is saying is Jesus is the true word. He is the one that you are called to watch. He is the one you are called to model. He is the one that you are called to learn the teachings from and how you are supposed to live your life. Because for the Israelites, listening, teaching, learning wasn't something that you just heard or read about. It was something that you participated in. Listening and doing could not be separated. Now, I think in our world, we struggle a lot with listening to each other. And I think as followers of Christ, it's important for us to model what truly listening is. To listen to the oppressed, to listen to the people we don't necessarily agree with, and to hear and to put what we've learned into action. And I do think that's something that we struggle with. I know for me specifically, I often struggle with listening and responding to it. This is kind of a funny example of something that happened this week, but Maybe some of you guys have had this where somebody has said something to you, you heard it, you're like, yeah, I got it, but then you completely forgot. Like this week, Chelsea asked me to flip over the laundry as she was leaving the house, and I was like, yeah, I hear you, I can do that, I got it right now. Super simple thing to do, but 6 hours later, I was like, oh crap, I totally forgot about it. She was about to get home, so I quick ran to the basement, thinking maybe I'll still get away with it, maybe she won't realize, but the laundry smelled, and so I had to rewash it, and I got caught. Right? I had heard what she had said, but I didn't truly Shema. I didn't truly listen. I didn't truly respond. And the big thing for us as followers of Christ is, I think, moving from hearing to listening and to responding. Moving from simply hearing to actually Shemaing the things people say about us, people say to us. And I think God knows that this word and this action is important to us because we see this word often throughout the scriptures. It's actually used over 1,000 times. And one of the ways that we see it play out most often is in the Psalms. If you actually look at almost every Psalm, they begin with the word hear, or they begin Shema, because the psalmist is not just asking God to hear his cries. He's not asking God to hear the struggles and the pain. He's asking God to respond, to bring healing, restoration, and hope in the midst of them. And throughout the scriptures, we often see God respond when people cry out to him. But in the same way that we see God respond, we see God call out to us in the same way, to hear his teachings, to hear his ways, to respond in love. He has called us to be his agents of change, to reach out to the voiceless, the oppressed, the vulnerable. God doesn't just want us to hear God's word, but to respond to his teachings, to Shema what he has shown us and live it out each day. That's why I believe the Shema is called the Shema, because it's not just a prayer to connect with God, but a prayer to remind ourselves to be a reflection of who God is and to respond to Jesus' teachings and how we relate to one another. Because the things we listen to have extreme power. And a lot of times, what we hear, what we learn, brings out a response to in us. But the question is, what are we listening to? Are we listening to the words of God? Or are we listening to the words of this world? Because I know sometimes in my life, I've struggled much more to respond to God's words than to respond to the words of my peers, friends, the media, or even bullies. Our response to the things we hear, the things we learn, the things we see is extremely important. And the question is, do the words of this world inform our response? Or do the words of God inform how we respond to the things of this world? Do we give in to the peer pressure because we're worried what people think? Do we change who we are because of what influencers or media say? Do we crumble at the words of bullies, or do we Shema the words of God who say we are fearfully and wonderfully made? When we see oppression, white supremacy, and violence, do we Shema the teachings of God who call us to stand up, love, and fight for our neighbor? Or do we stay silent because we're worried about what people might think? Listening and responding is extremely hard work. And in order to listen and respond well, we need to know God's word well. It can't go in one ear and out the other. So to close today, I want to share a passage from James 1:22 through 25 that says this: do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at their face in a mirror, and after looking at themselves goes away and immediately forgets what they look like. But whoever looks intently into the Torah, into the teachings, and responds to it, who continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. The thing that's always interested me about this verse is that very few people had mirrors back then. The only way you could actually truly see a reflection of yourself was to go down to the stream, go get water. Now, if you've read throughout the scriptures, you often have probably heard that water is a metaphor for God's word, who God was, Jesus' teachings. It was the source of life. They had to get water each day, and it was hard work. They didn't have faucets or water purifiers. They had to boil it, and if they did not go, they would not survive. What I believe God is saying here is that we need to go to the water each day. We need to go to the source of life. And yes, it's going to be hard work. It's not always going to be easy. But when we go to the streams of water, we'll see a reflection of who God calls us to be. We'll see a reflection of the strength that God has empowered us, the teachings that he's laid in our lives, that he's called on us. We'll see a reflection of the love that he has called us to be to the world. And when we pour into that, we'll be better able to be a reflection of who he is to the people that we come in contact with each day. So friends, I hope that gives you a deeper understanding of the word Shema, that when you're engaging in the scriptures and you come across that word here, you'll be reminded that it's not simply hearing, but it's also about responding and putting things into action. And I hope that as we become better listeners of God's word together, we will become better agents of God's love to the world. Hope you guys have a great small group. I hope you enjoy discussing that. Check out a few passages that I've put with the word Shema and see what they might be speaking to you and how they are calling you to respond. Love you guys. I'll see you soon.